My name is Maya Whitfield. I'm 34 and I spent the last 7 years working emergency room shifts on the other side of the world. The kind of years that turn birthdays and holidays into dates you notice on a chart instead of days you actually live. When I finally flew home to surprise my mother in the house I'd bought her, a woman I'd never met opened my own front door, looked me up and down like I'd tracked something in on my shoes, and said, "Go around back. My mother-in-law will show you what needs doing." Her mother-in-law was my mother. 64 years old, on her knees in a black apron, scrubbing patio stone for somebody else's dinner party, in a house that had exactly one name on the deed, mine. My brother and his wife had been living there for 16 months. What I found inside that house, room by room, was worse than what I found kneeling in the yard. And what I did about it before 9 o'clock that same night is the reason my sister-in-law still tells people, to anyone who'll listen, that I destroyed this family. Stay with me, because here's what none of them knew yet. The deed was zipped in my backpack, and I had a 3 o'clock appointment nobody in that house had heard about. To explain that doorstep, I have to go back 9 years to a kitchen table buried in unpaid bills. My father, Walter, died of a stroke on a Sunday afternoon and left my mother, Diane, sitting on $62,000 of medical debt. She was 56, a quilter who took in alterations to get by. I was 26, 2 years into nursing, pulling every overtime shift a hospital outside Columbus would give me. It wasn't enough. My brother, Coleman, was 29, building his own life, and I never blamed him for that. Somebody has to stay standing while somebody else goes under. At 28, a recruiter called about an ER contract in Doha, nearly triple my pay, tax-free. My mother drove me to the airport herself and pressed a bag of shortbread into my hands at the security line, still warm from the oven, wrapped in a dish towel like I was 9, and headed to summer camp instead of across an ocean. "Don't you forget your way home," she said. I promised her 18 months. I gave her 7 years instead. Remember that number? My brother never did the math. People hear nurse overseas and picture beaches. It was 13-hour trauma shifts in a language I barely spoke. Half my patients reading my face because neither of us had the words for anything else. Thanksgiving charting labs beside a vending machine. My grandmother's funeral watched through a cracked phone screen propped against a break room shelf. My engagement ended over video call in year 2, quietly, because he said he couldn't love someone 11 hours ahead of him. I paid off my father's debt in year 3, standing in a stairwell with the zero balance lit up on my phone, and I cried for exactly 1 flight of stairs before wiping my face and going back to work. Nurses spend their whole careers running toward the thing everyone else is running from. Turns out that instinct works just as well on debt. Then I opened a second account and named it Sunroom. My mother had wanted a room with real light her whole life. The daughter of a janitor, 40 years hemming other people's clothes, never once owning a house she hadn't rented or inherited. Every month, whatever was left after rent went into that account. By year 5, it crossed $190,000, and some daughters send flowers. I was saving up to hand her an entire house. 2 years ago, I closed on a 4-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Lane, Meadow Ridge, Indiana. $580,000, wide porch, a sunroom facing east so the morning light hit first. I put down nearly $200,000 and carried the mortgage myself, auto-paid from overseas. Our family lawyer, a careful man named Grant Ashford, gave me one piece of advice I didn't fully understand at the time. Keep the title in your name for now. Widows get targeted the moment word gets out they own property. And frankly, Maya, it's worth protecting from anybody's creditors. There was a pause on the line, because we both knew my brother's business had already started wobbling, and neither of us said his name. The plan was simple. On my next long visit, we'd put the house in a trust, granting my mother the right to live there for life. Until then, the deed stayed in my name, and my mother told people her daughter had merely helped with the down payment, so Coleman wouldn't feel small I let her say it. That small kindness of hers matters later. The day she got her keys, she cried into her coat collar on that porch, then planted flowers before she'd unpacked a single box. She started calling it the house Maya built. My father used to say, "Take care of your mother, not with words." I thought I finally had. I had no idea the hard part hadn't started. I want to be fair to my brother, because for most of our lives, he deserved it. Coleman is 37, a contractor, 17 years in the trade, married 3 years ago at the courthouse to a woman named Brianna, who grew up bounced between rentals. When she was 11, she watched her family's furniture carried out to a curb while her classmates walked past. She swore she'd never live that way again. I understood the wound. I didn't yet understand what she'd do to keep it from reopening. A year and a half ago, Coleman's business collapsed. A partner vanished with the accounts, and 2 months later, the bank took his house. He called me exactly once, not to ask for help, but to refuse it. "You send money, Maya. I show up in person. That's the difference between us." He laughed like it was a joke. Neither of us believed it. Pride doesn't come cheap. I didn't know yet who'd be paying that bill. 2 months later, my mother called with a small favor. Coleman and Brianna needed somewhere to land, just for a few weeks. I said yes. It was her house to open, and I only asked for 2 things, out loud, with Coleman listening. Temporary, and Mom stays the lady of the house. "We'll take better care of her than she takes of us," Coleman said, all porch-light charm. From somewhere off camera, Brianna's voice floated in, sugared. "We're just so grateful." That was the second time I ever heard her voice, both times out of frame. 3 months in, Brianna's mother, Pat, came for a weekend after a rent hike and never really left. I asked my mother if she minded a 4th adult in the house, and there was a pause I didn't like before she said, "It's fine, sweetheart. There's room." I've replayed that pause more than 100 times. Every small yes she gave stacked up quietly, like snow on a roof. You don't hear the beam bend, you only hear it break. 10 months ago, my mother had hip surgery, and that surgery became the hinge everything else swung on. "No stairs while she heals," Coleman said, warm and reasonable, which is exactly what made it such a clean trap. Her old phone broke, and our Sunday calls moved to his tablet, with him always hovering at the edge of the frame. My mother started showing up thinner, her knuckles red and cracked, and when I asked why she looked tired, Coleman answered for her. "You know, Mom, she likes staying busy." Mom would smile at the camera, the way a person smiles when they're reading off a card somebody handed them. And I want to be honest, I noticed. I read faces for a living, the ones people put on when the truth costs too much to say out loud. What I didn't yet notice was Coleman himself, some nights, standing at the bottom of those stairs a beat too long before he'd go up, like some part of him already knew what he'd traded for that mortgage-free roof. I mailed her a replacement phone. It never arrived. Tracking said delivered, signed for by someone who wasn't her. I offered to pay for a house cleaner. Coleman laughed it off. "We're family, we don't need strangers in the house." One Sunday, she said, almost too quiet to catch, "Things are a little tight this month." Then changed the subject, like she'd touched a hot stove. I didn't get on a plane that week because my unit was mid-accreditation and I was the lead. Walking out meant losing my visa and abandoning 40 patients. I counted down the days to my banked leave the way people count down to a wedding. 2 things finally sent me to the airport. First, a birthday flower delivery with a photo request. My mother in a faded housecoat, hanging laundry alone on her own birthday. Second, an email from Dorothy Vance, my mother's oldest friend from church, 71 and sharp as a tack. She'd seen my mother hauling groceries across a rain-soaked lot while a younger woman waited dry in the car. "Something's shifted in that house," Dorothy wrote, and I thought her daughter deserved to know. I read it on a night shift and went very calm and very cold, the way I do when a patient starts to crash. I booked a flight, told no one, and confirmed the appointment Grant and I had circled for 2 years. Friday, 3 o'clock. Sign the trust. I zipped the whole file into my backpack. Deed, mortgage, closing statement. Paper weighs almost nothing, and it can still hold a whole house up. 18 hours in the air. I rehearsed one sentence, over and over, until it stopped sounding like anything. Surprise, Mom, I never got to say it. The taxi turned onto Birchwood Lane to find a strange SUV in the driveway. I rang my own doorbell like a stranger. Ball cap, sunglasses, 18 hours of travel on me, and a blonde woman in a silk robe opened the door and looked me over like produce. She'd posted an ad that week for part-time cleaning help, so when she saw a tired woman in a ball cap, she didn't see family. Go around back, she said, already turning away. My mother-in-law will show you what needs doing. Then her phone rang, and she left my own front door hanging open behind her. I stepped into my own foyer like a stranger. New photos on the mantle. Brianna and Coleman at the courthouse, Pat with a wine glass, where my father's portrait used to hang. A sign read, "Bless this home." From the backyard came a wet, rhythmic scraping I recognized before I could name it, and I walked toward it already knowing, the way you know bad news through a door, exactly who I'd find. My mother was on her knees on a garden pad, a scrub brush moving back and forth in slow, tired circles. Her hydrangeas, the whole reason she'd fallen in love with that yard in the first place, had been shoved into plastic pots in a shady corner to make room for a new patio set. The price tag still zip-tied to one of the chairs like nobody had even bothered to look at it twice. Mom. She turned, and for half a second, I got the whole sunrise. Her face opening, my name breaking loose from her like relief, finally let off a leash. Then the lights slammed shut, fast, like a door caught by wind. Her eyes went straight to the windows, checking who might be watching. She gripped my arms and whispered, in her own backyard, in a voice made small by habit, "Honey, you can't just show up. They don't love surprises." My mother hugged me hard, then held me at arm's length like I was contraband. Her knuckles were split and red. Dish soap hands, not garden hands. I asked, level, why she was scrubbing stone. Brianna's book club is tonight. It keeps me busy. Keeps her busy. I asked why she was wearing an apron in her own yard, and she said the thing that told me the shape of everything. Please don't say anything about the money. Then she clapped both hands over her mouth, like the words had escaped on their own. She wouldn't explain. So I asked to see her room, and the tour of my own house became a crime scene walk. A fold-out cot on the sun porch, her pills in a plastic organizer. Boxes labeled Diane in someone else's handwriting, still packed after 10 months. Upstairs, Coleman and Brianna had the master. The stairs, honey. And Pat had my mother's old room with the good light. The floral wallpaper my mother had waited her whole life to choose had been stripped. Brianna says florals date a house. She said it without 1 ounce of anger, and that absence scared me more than anger would have. On the fridge, a laminated chore chart. Diane. Laundry, bathrooms, dinner. Check boxes in Brianna's handwriting. Coleman came in through the garage, froze for half a breath, then chose delight. Big hug, big laugh. You didn't call? Bri, look who's here. Brianna recalibrated instantly. You should have called. I'd have made up the guest room. What guest room? From the living room, a voice rang out like a bell for staff. Diane? Tea? Extra lemon? That was Pat. And my mother moved on command. 10 months of surgery recovery, and she just moved. I asked Coleman, pleasant as I could manage, why our mother was sleeping next to the washing machine. Stairs are hard on her hip. You'd know that if you were ever here. He said it kindly, which made it worse. Lunch told me the rest. Brianna set 4 plates and a tray. Diane likes eating in her room, she explained, about my mother standing right there. I pulled out the chair beside mine. Sit with me, Mom. You'd have thought I'd pulled a fire alarm. My mother sat, hands folded like a girl called to the principal's office, while Brianna's smile thinned to wire. Everyone here contributes. Mom understands that. Contributes. In the house her daughter had paid for outright. I smiled, I nodded, and inside I went as quiet and still as a prepped operating room. You don't yell at an infection in the ER. You document it, and then you treat it. Coleman filled the silence with talk of a new deck, maybe selling someday for something with more land. Sell, easy as passing salt, about a house he'd never owned an inch of. I said I needed to run to the bank and took the mail from the counter on my way out. A store card statement, $4,100 in charges, a boutique, a spa, meals my mother would never buy herself, signed in a hand that wasn't hers. In the kitchen, with the water running loud on purpose, she finally whispered the rest. Brianna had borrowed the card, and every month my mother handed Coleman $600 cash from her Social Security. 16 months, nearly $14,000, out of a widow whose entire check was under $2,000. "Please don't say anything," she whispered. "He gets loud about money." I told her we were going to the bank, right now. While she hunted for her shoes, I found, tucked inside her Bible, an application to a senior living facility, a waiting list confirmation dated 3 weeks earlier, a receipt for a deposit paid in 1s and 5s. She'd been quietly planning to erase herself so the house could pass to her son. "It's a lovely place, honey," she said, catching me holding it. "They let you keep 2 houseplants." I'd bought her a sunroom with windows on 3 sides, and they'd shrunk her whole future down to 2 houseplants by a stranger's window. "Nobody is going anywhere, Mom," I said, "except the people upstairs." In the car, she finally talked. It started kind. It really did. Every step had come with a reasonable explanation you couldn't argue with in the moment. "Nobody asks you to hand over your whole life at once. They ask for 1 room at a time." She admitted she'd stayed quiet because coming home early would have cost me my visa, my job, everything I'd bled for. Then, she said the sentence that rearranged my whole plan. Once she was settled at the facility, the house would pass to Coleman. Maybe that finally steadies him. She believed it was already his to inherit. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. "Mom, that house was never yours to leave him. It's mine, and by tonight, it'll be yours in a way nobody can touch." At the bank, an older teller with reading glasses on a chain leaned in and lowered her voice. "We flagged some activity on this account once, ma'am. The gentleman said it was rent." The gentleman was Coleman, added as an authorized user 9 months earlier, right after the surgery, to help with bills while my mother was still on a walker. She'd tried to remove him back in the spring, she told me, standing at that same counter, but the bank required both of them present, and he'd stayed busy every single Saturday for 3 straight months. 16 months of statements confirmed the rest of the pattern. Deposits on the 2nd, 600 gone on the 3rd, like clockwork, plus a stray charge here and there at a gas station or a sporting goods store. We froze the old account, opened a new one in both our names, redirected her Social Security starting the next cycle. I didn't raise my voice once. Paper doesn't need volume to do its job. As we stood to leave, her phone buzzed. A text from Brianna. "Guests at 6. Wear the black apron." My mother's thumb hovered over the reply. 16 months of reflex loaded into that one small motion. I took the phone gently and read it again, myself. Something in me went very still, because I understood, suddenly, exactly what Brianna had just handed me. She'd built herself a stage and invited an entire audience of witnesses, delivered with place cards. I decided I'd be the one to rewrite the ending. I've spent 7 years asking patients for consent before I move a pillow, so I asked my mother plainly, could she stand beside me tonight while I ended this in front of everyone? She was quiet a long moment, looked at her cracked knuckles, and said, "I've been humiliated for 16 months, sweetheart. 1 more evening won't kill me. It might just cure me." I had 1 afternoon to take my house back. At Grant's office by 3, we rebuilt the ground under my mother in under an hour. The trust, granting her the right to live there for life, untouchable by anyone, not even by me, I told him to write. A new will, leaving everything to her, and after her, A nursing scholarship in my father's name. Coleman's name doesn't appear, and it isn't spite, it's accuracy. 3 letters revoking permission to occupy the property. Effective that night. A repayment agreement for the $14,000, $200 a month. On the way out, we updated her emergency contacts and discovered, almost by accident, that Coleman had put a pen in her hand for a healthcare proxy while she was still groggy from surgery. We voided it and signed a new one, wide awake, with a notary present. In the car afterward, she defended him anyway. He used to carry my groceries when he was 9, because that's the tax mothers pay forever. I know, Mom. I'm not punishing that boy. I'm stopping the man who took your bedroom. Dorothy, briefed on nothing except an invitation to Brianna's party, promised to sit close to my mother that night. I've been praying somebody would show up, she said. I didn't know God flew coach. By 5:30, the house had become Brianna's stage. Candles like a runway, place cards, my mother's wedding china on the buffet. Oh, that came with the house, Brianna told a guest, breezy as a catalog. As far as she was concerned, so had my mother. When Pat tried to summon her for tea, I stepped between them. I've got it, Pat. When Brianna held out the black apron, daring me with her eyes, I took it first. I'll cover Mom's part tonight. The one pouring the tea hears every table. Invisible turned out to be the best seat in the house. At 6:30, Dorothy arrived with a lemon cake and a wink only I caught. Brianna gave the guests the tour. Coleman has such plans for the backyard. We're thinking a fire pit where those old hydrangeas are. One woman asked after, that sweet lady who's always watering them. Brianna laughed a rehearsed laugh. Coleman's mom lives with us. She's basically part of the staff. Dorothy didn't laugh. Pat, deep in her wine, went further. We took Diane in. Family takes care of family. Coleman kept glancing at me all night, the way liars do when their own internal alarm won't shut off. He finally cornered me by the coat closet. Whatever you think you're doing. I'm serving dinner. Sit down. He searched my face, found something new there, and sat. Dinner went out at 7:15. The locksmith texted at 7:30 on schedule. Coleman stood and tapped his glass. Real family shows up in person. Some people would rather chase a paycheck overseas and mail home a check at Christmas, but the ones who stay, that's what makes a house a home. One guest leaned over. Isn't that Coleman's sister? Brianna answered for the table. She's shy. That's when my mother put down her fork, stood to spite her hip, and said, louder than I'd heard her in years, her name is Maya, and this, Mom, sit. Coleman's voice came down like a gavel. The table went silent, my mother standing alone in 16 months of it. I untied the apron, folded it once, and laid it over the back of an empty chair. Done with that costume. Actually, Coleman, I'd love to toast. I lifted my backpack off the hook by the hutch and set a manila folder on the tablecloth, next to the lemon cake. But first, one question. Whose name is on this house? He scoffed, but his eyes had already gone to the folder. It's Mom's house. Family house. What is this? Brianna, whose name? Her chin came up, defensive. What kind of question? Pat jumped in, wine-flushed and thrilled to be called on. Diane's, obviously. And someday, when she's called home, it'll... She caught herself one breath too late. One greedy breath too late. And every woman at that table heard exactly where the sentence had been headed. It'll be ours. Dorothy set down her teacup with a click that landed in the silence like a gavel of her own. I slid the deed across the table. Read the grantee line, Coleman. I watched the color drain out of his face exactly the way it does off a patient 30 seconds before the monitor confirms what you already know. Maya Elaine Whitfield, he read, and somewhere a spoon slipped against china. I laid it out flat and even. The deed, mine, $200,000 down, never a late payment. The trust, signed that afternoon, my mother's right to live there for life, untouchable. There is no version of the future where this house becomes yours, Coleman. There never was. 3 letters revoking their permission to occupy the property, effective that night. Brianna shot up. This is our home. No, I said, quieter than her by half. It's the house my mother has a life right to. Inside walls I own. You've been guests here, guests who made the owner scrub your patio on her knees. Dorothy rose and stood beside my mother. The two churchwomen followed. Pat found her pulpit voice. In my day, family didn't do this to family. And I set the laminated chore chart on the table beside the deed. In your day, did dinner guests assign the homeowner her own bathroom schedule? Brianna wheeled on me, out of ammunition but never out of aim. You think you can waltz in? This morning, I said. You told me my mother-in-law would show me what needs doing. That was my mother, Brianna. The table felt it land. Coleman roared up out of his chair. You were never even here, and slammed his palm on the table hard enough to jump the candles. I waited for the wine to go still. I'm here now. That's all I gave him. I laid down the bank statements. $14,000 out of a widow living on less than $2 a month. There's a name for that and a statute to go with it. So here's your one choice, not two. Out by 9, sign the repayment agreement, $200 a month. Or Monday morning, I walk into the police station with 6 witnesses who are sitting right here tonight. To Brianna, I said the harder, truer thing. You know what an eviction feels like. I'm offering you what that landlord never offered your mother. A way out with your dignity. Take it. She looked away first, and for a second, something almost like the 11-year-old who'd watched her own family's furniture on a curb flickered across her face before she caught it and put the wire smile back on. Coleman folded into his chair, hands over his face, and for one moment, he was just my brother again. Not the man who'd stood at the head of that table, but the boy who used to carry grocery bags too heavy for him rather than admit they were. I lost the business, then the house. Running this place was the only thing that still felt like winning. My mother's hand lifted toward him. He swatted it away and turned on his wife instead. This is on her. Brianna rounded on him. My idea. You're the one who said your mother likes feeling useful. And there they were, tearing at each other in front of the whole street, each one looking for somewhere else to set down the weight of it, while my mother quietly lowered her hand. The guests left the way people leave a graveside. Dorothy stayed and put the kettle on. Upstairs, drawers slammed. Pat tried negotiating on the stairs. Surely I can keep my room one more week, and I told her she had until 9. Coleman signed the repayment agreement at my father's old oak table, using a pen from his failed company, and I let that detail go without comment. Some debts collect themselves. The locksmith worked door to door while suitcases rolled down the driveway. New locks going in, old tenants going out. The most satisfying sound I know. At 8:52, Brianna threw the house keys down hard enough to scratch the wood. You'll die alone in this house. I held the door open. No, my mother nearly did. Drive safe. At 9 exactly, the deadbolt turned over with a click that was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in 7 years. Locks? Done. Emergency contacts? Updated. My phone buzzed. A text from Grant. Executed. Every line. Dorothy and I carried my mother's things back up the stairs she'd been banished from for 10 months. Her wedding photo went on the dresser. Her Bible on the nightstand. Her clothes hung by color because, Dorothy said, Diane deserves a closet that looks like a garden. My mother stood in the middle of that room, turned in a slow circle like she was checking whether a dream had corners, then sat on the bed and smoothed the quilt with both cracked hands, careful, before she remembered it was hers. That's when she finally came apart. The good kind. The kind that only happens once a person is allowed to stop apologizing. What do I do with this whole room, Maya? Sleep in it, Mom. That's the whole job now. I found the black apron where Brianna had left it and dropped it in her box of forgotten things on the porch. It was never my mother's uniform. It was their flag. They could keep it. 3 weeks later, here's where everything stands. Coleman and Brianna are on her cousin's couch across town. He took a night shift at a warehouse, and the first $200 hit my mother's account on time. I don't need his apology. I need his autopay. Pat rents a room near her other daughter, who I'm told keeps a chore chart of her own. The same 6 women who sat at that dinner table now visit my mother every Sunday through the front door carrying cake. My mother's hydrangeas came out of the shady corner and into full sun, right where the fire pit was supposed to go, and they've already put out new growth. She tore up the senior living application herself and dropped it in the compost. "It'll feed the flowers," she said. "Waste not." I signed a new contract before I flew back out. 10 weeks on, 5 weeks home, and those 5 weeks now belong to a bedroom with floral wallpaper going back up on the walls. Because florals date a house, and so do widows, and I intend to let both of them date it for a long time. Coleman texted me once, near the end of my leave. "Can we talk?" I stood in the yard a long while with the hose running cold over my hand, not really watering anything anymore, just holding it. He's still my brother. He carried her groceries in from the car when he was 9 years old, arms too short for the bags, refusing help. He also collected $600 a month out of her hand, while she slept beside a washing machine for 10 months. Both of those things are true at once, and I've stopped trying to make them cancel each other out. I sent back the only terms I actually had. "When the last payment clears, we'll see who shows up." He hasn't answered. The hydrangeas have. That's enough accounting for 1 year. My father used to say, "Take care of your mother," not with words. It took me 7 years overseas and 1 dinner party to understand the whole of that sentence. You take care of her not with words and not even with money, but with your name on the right paperwork, your feet in the right doorway, and your voice calm and unshaking on the one night it counts. That's my story. 1 flight home, 1 folder of paper, and a mother finally asleep in the room she always deserved.